Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. I am once again back talking about the latest edition of Warcry, but today, instead of talking about various factions, I want to talk about Warcry as a whole. Today, I want to talk about what makes Warcry so darn compelling. But before we get into all of that, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and a subscribe. It really helps the channel out and lets me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon and helps me get my content out to new Warcry players and help grow the greater Warcry community. But without further ado, let's get on with the rest of the show. So let's start off by talking about Games Workshop as a whole. And as we all know, Games Workshop are, well, they're a company that is well known for doing a lot of things. And of course, some of those things are kind of crappy. For example, the inability to maintain any semblance of balance within their flagship game, Warhammer 40,000, or the wildly inflated cost of every single product they've ever produced, or just their relentless pursuit of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Now, of course, despite all of their flaws, Games Workshop does produce some absolutely stellar content and does produce absolutely stellar things in general. For example, Warhammer 40,000, despite being flawed in a way that hurts my soul, does produce some absolutely stellar models, in addition to having a universe that is begging to be absorbed and explored. And of course, they also have an outstanding library of games that is outstanding both in terms of sheer skill and in some cases in terms of pure quality. And of course, this is where Warcry comes into view. Warcry's second edition is about a year old now, coming on to 2 years, and it has very quickly catapulted itself as my favourite game of all time. Not just by Games Workshop, I just mean just in general, ever. I've been in this hobby for over 2 decades now, and Warcry has hit me in all the right places at all the right times, and I wanted to take some time myself to talk about it in a way that is positive, that is good, because my most popular video on this channel is actually me talking quite negatively about Warcry and all of its various problems, and I wanted to amend that by doing a video that was far more upbeat, even if this video is 6 months after the fact. But in short, I do think Warcry is peak skirmish gaming, peak Games Workshop, and just peak hobby life, and we're going to talk about why that is now. Firstly, it's the scale of the game. Warcry is a small game. We are talking at most 15 models, and at the very least, you're looking at about 3, with the average being somewhere between 7 and 8 models in size. And frankly, 7, 8, or 9 models is the perfect amount of models to make any game that little bit more enticing. But why is that? Well, that flows into the concept of time. And if all I have to do is build and paint and base, let's say 8 models, then I can get that all done and dusted in a long weekend or just a week of light dabbling in the evening. With a warband that small, I can get it to the table and actually play the game far quicker than just about any other Games Workshop game, especially games that are far more popular. And of course, this also means I avoid so many of the common hobby hurdles that tend to bump into people along the way to getting to the table. For example, how about burnout? How many times have you been working on a project and then that project got a little bit too big for you, or just too much? You started with dreams of grandeur, and then it all fell apart very suddenly as you got bored of painting your 10,000th orc, and then you just put it on permanent hold. This has probably happened to more projects than you have projects you've successfully completed. Those projects forever trapped in limbo. I know personally that I have at least 5 armies behind me right now that have not been finished, and they will very likely never be finished. But on the flip side, I have 25 warbands that are built and painted and based. And that's pretty darn cool. In my experience, this hobby limbo, this failed project idea, this pile of shame doesn't necessarily happen in Warcry, and if it does, it doesn't happen anywhere near as often, and the impact on your wallet is far less, well, impactful. 8 dudes is less than a full squad in just about any other game Games Workshop does, and that's just an achievable project size for everybody, whether they're older, younger, children, adults, it doesn't matter, teenagers, it really doesn't matter. This is a size, a scale that is just perfect in terms of balancing what you want to do on the tabletop, making it look cool, whilst also not draining your entire life and passion to ever play that thing ever again. Like, I am in my early 30s now, and I have 3 kids and a job full-time, and of course this channel, which I'm trying to ramp up the amount of content I produce each week from 1 video sporadically every 3 months to 2 videos every week, and I think it's been pretty darn cool. But all of this takes time, and I don't have the time to invest in Age of Sigmar's grand armies or Warhammer 40,000's endless tirade of content and things to buy and update. It's just not something I can do despite being massive fans of both of those games. Looking at the demographics of my YouTube viewers, I am pretty darn confident when I say that every single person watching this video right now has experienced a lack of time as they've gotten older. And when the hobby aspect of your, well, hobby takes up so much time, it can be very hard to maintain any level of passion, especially when a huge part of this hobby is actually getting to play with those toy soldiers. And when those toy soldiers take months to get through, that passion can fade. It can go away without constant stimulus to reignite that. And here comes the next biggest issue with other games that aren't Warcry, is the time it takes to play. You can get a game of Warcry done in 45 minutes, very, very comfortably within 45 minutes, and it'll stretch at most to an hour and a half, unless, you know, you're imbibing some rather potent fluids. Then at that point it can take a little bit longer, but you're also far merrier. A good old swig of mead tends to do that. But a game of Warhammer 40,000, a game of Age of Sigmar, well, from experience, a 1,000 game of 40,000 at the minute, it took me 3 hours to get through. And that was an ordeal that was both incredibly time consuming and incredibly tiring in general. And the same can be said for other games within Games Workshop's sphere of games. I absolutely love Blood Bowl, but Blood Bowl is a long-ass game and it has a tiny model count. So just because the model count is lower in Blood Bowl does not actually mean Blood Bowl is as accommodating to somebody who is a smidge on the older side. Of course, then you have the variety factor that Warcry brings. Warcry allowing you to get through a project so quickly and get that project to the table means that you can spice up your hobby life fairly quickly just by buying a new box of dudes. You can finish up your Splintered Fang, have a few games, have a great time, play weekly if you want to, do what you want, and then move on to your next project and then be done by the next time you get a game in without much stress at all. And this just allows you to spice up what you want to do. You aren't necessarily bound to a incredibly expensive army purchase and then have to convince the wife that you need to buy another 2,000 point army because it's all the rage now and you really like those space dwarfs. Now, of course, this comes at a cost, a monetary cost to be specific, not the nebulous temporal cost that is time itself. I spend an awful lot of money on Warcry, and that is partially because I have to, having a Warcry channel, and partially because I'm in a lucky enough position where I can actually do that. So having a fairly substantial stockpile of dudes is a thing I have and is great for teaching new players and just doing general Warcry stuff. Now, of course, that stockpile of models is not at all required. All you need to do to get started in Warcry is buy a box of dudes. It is by far Games Workshop's cheapest game to start and cheapest game to continue playing. Looking at a basic ass warband in Warcry, you are looking at a £35 investment, and that will get you 1,000 points of Warcry on the table that you can use immediately. Once you get that built, you're free to use, and just about every box that Games Workshop does is fine to play. They are fairly balanced against each other, especially if you are just sticking to the contents of that box in a box v box format. The internal balance is fairly solid and is a fantastic way to just start. And of course, as one box of Warcry is literally a complete faction that you can play from the get-go, you could theoretically buy 10 boxes of Warcry and have 10 separate, fully formed factions for the price of a single 1,000 point Warhammer 40,000 or Age of Sigmar equivalent army. And that's not all. If you wanted to forgo the pre-built warbands, you could of course go into the compendium, and the compendium allows you to do a lot of things. Firstly, if you have a collection of anything else Games Workshop does within the Age of Sigmar brand, so we're talking Age of Sigmar itself or Warhammer Underworlds, then you have Warcry as well, because nearly every single model in Age of Sigmar is compatible with Warcry, and a huge selection of Underworld warbands are actually compatible as Bladeborn allies within Warcry. So if you play Games Workshop's other games, you can play Warcry because the rules are all free and you already have the models. But if you had no models and you were just interested in picking up some dudes, a surprising number of factions can be fully fleshed out with the purchase of just one box and a character. Let's look at, for example, the Savage Aurochs or the Bone Splitters. You can buy a single box of Bone Splitters. You have everything you need to build a very powerful Savage Auroch warband. But let's look at another faction, Soulblight Gravelords. All you need to do is buy a box of Graveguard and then maybe a Vampire, and you're pretty much good to go. But let's take a step away from the investment side of things, both in terms of money and also time, and look at Warcry as a system. What makes Warcry so good mechanically? Well, Warcry is the perfect casual game, and that's because the rules are so damn simple to pick up. Warcry is quite possibly the simplest game Games Workshop has ever produced. This is in part to the rules just being super intuitive. Let's take movement as an example. In most other games, movement has pages upon pages of rules that you've got to look up just to see how it works, to abstract things. Like, how do you climb obstacles, climb ruin, scale buildings? How do you move through forests? How do you do anything? It's all heavily abstracted and heavily steeped in a thick, viscous goop of rules and tedium. And then you factor in games like Warhammer Fantasy, where things get even wackier, and you've got to factor in rotation, skirmishers, flyers, reforms, angles, and more. It can get nightmarish to do, and even their simpler games like 40k, it's just, there's a lot of fiddly nonsense that just gets in the way. In Warcry, by comparison, it's so simple. Scattering, you ignore it for the most part. You just move over it, because of course you just vault over a small rock in your way. You wouldn't have to carefully measure an inch up, an inch across, and an inch down. That's just nonsensically tedious, when anyone in their right mind would just frickin' jump over the fence. Or how about you want to climb something like a tree or a building or a ladder? Just do it. It's just you move to it and then use your movement to climb up it. It's that simple. It's so easy to do. And because you only move one model at a time as opposed to giant units, you're free to move and finagle and just have a bit of fun with where you put things and how you do things. And it's easy to do. Nothing falls off. It's not having to factor in coherency and nonsense like that. You just climb the goddamn tree. But what if you wanted to propel yourself in a horizontal fashion across a large gap, well, that's called jumping in a more common term, and you can jump in Warcry just by moving. There's no other real rule to it. You just move, you measure, you jump the gap, and you either make it or you don't based on how swift you are and the size of the gap in question. Movement as a key example is Warcry in a nutshell. It is so darn fluid, and the game very rarely gets more complicated than that. If you want to do the thing, you can very likely just do the thing, and it's fine. There's no thought to it. Once you make movement so fundamental to your game, and then make movement so darn simple to understand and then comprehend and then apply in a practical sense, it all just comes together effortlessly. And of course, it leads to some uniquely cinematic moments you just don't get anywhere else. I could have my Minotaur chase your grot up a tree, get to the edge of the platform, swing his axe, clip you on your ass, and then jump off that tree to land safely on the floor as your grot then stumbles, falls out of the tree, and then lands on a spike and dies. And all of that happens because the rules say it happens, and the rules are very, very simple. And believe it or not, all that happened with only 2 dice rolls. Or as another example, how about you want to get to an objective, but you can't get there by traditional means and you are already on a platform? Well, how about you jump between platforms and bridges and then take a somewhat entertaining vertical shortcut to your destination, as opposed to slowly climbing down and then slowly trundling your way towards the objective like an old man with a Zimmer frame. It's just cool shit all the time in Warcry. It's awesome. And then outside of movement, you have combat, which is so quick and crunchy. Most guys only have 3 attacks, and then they have 2 actions. And in most cases, fights are, I move my dude, and then I hit you with my dude. And that's it. And then what do? You roll your 3 dice. And then things happen. There's only 1 dice roll in Warcry for combat. You roll to hit. If you hit, you do damage. You don't have a, oh, well, I've hit, now I need to roll to wound. And then, oh, now you take an armor save, or you take an invulnerable save, or you take mortal wounds, or you have a mortal wound save, or you've got feel no fucking pain, or you've got rerolls for each and every one of those other things, or you've got a ward save, or any number of other extra rolls every other game Games Workshop throws in. They're all gone. It's all factored in. Stats, you roll 1 set of dice, then it's done. I roll my dice and that's it. It's so quick, so slick. Bash, boom, pow. How do you like me now? Oh wait, you don't like anything because you're now dead. You've been cleaved in twain by a frickin' Minotaur, and it was awesome to see. Warcry has a real sense of immediacy. There is no downtime. It's always going, and because turns alternate on a model by model basis, you are always doing something. You aren't waiting 20 minutes for Gary to move his 120th orc boy across the field, 1 model at a frickin' time. Instead, you wait for Gary to move a single model, and then it's your go, and only 10 seconds have passed. You just pick up Warcry for the first time, you understand the core of the game by the end of the first battle round, and then you are hooked. It's just that easy to get into, that easy to teach. Every turn is quick, every turn is clear, and very rarely do rules ever get in the way. It's just a fun time. As casual as Warcry is, and as easy as it is to get into, one thing that really stands out with Warcry is that it's also very competitive. Most casual games do not have the facilities or the capability to scale beyond its intention, and Warcry was intended to be casual, and that is where it should have died. It should have lived and died as a casual game that was fun to play. That is not the case, because Warcry is so well written, so well made as a game that it's incredibly competitive, as in it goes from a beer and pretzel slug match to an intense battle of wits between 2 keen-minded generals. there is always more you can do in Warcry to optimize yourself both in-game and out-of-game, tweaking your list so you have the perfect blend of models, abilities, projection, and mobility, tailoring your list to handle specific tournament packs and the missions that are held within, or even just tackling your specific meta, or even just making a whole new meta, because Warcry is so new and its competitive scene is so fresh that new ideas and new concepts are being developed all the time. This is not a solved game. This is a game that is in flux constantly as new players get involved and new ideas come into the light. In a competitive game of Warcry, it is a rip-roaring battle of wits. Every action becomes important as you vie for dominance of the battlefield. Fake-outs, deception, cunning ruses, and straight-up slug matches break out all the time, usually all at the same time. It's uniquely intoxicating and completely optional. Warcry never has to be competitive, but the fact the rules scale so perfectly to allow for highly competitive environments is a testament to how well made this game truly is. Not only that, Warcry's competitive scene, its tournament crowd, is so new that it hasn't even fully formed yet. The scene is growing and it will only get bigger as more and more people fall in love with the game. It is a perfect time to start Warcry, both casually and competitively. It's just waiting to be discovered and waiting to be explored by new players. And to help you along the way, you have the Warcry community. No matter how you want to play Warcry, the Warcry community is there, and the Warcry community is outstanding. Beyond outstanding even. I have never had a bad interaction in my year or so of active community involvement, and everyone I have met has commented on how truly outstanding this community is. Everyone is willing to help anyone and achieve whatever it is they want to achieve out of their hobby. People are happy to clarify rules, teach the game, introduce you to Tabletop Simulator, gas up your hobby achievements, and generally accept you into a group that is, for the most part, just a bunch of mothers and fathers connecting over a fucking awesome game of toy soldiers. Heck, this channel only exists because the community suggested I give it a go and then supported me whilst I was learning the ropes. Warcry is just an outstanding hobby to be a part of, and the people are what really make it that. So a huge shout out to the amazing Warcry content creators out there. I have just hit 1,000 subscribers, and instead of gassing myself up, which rest assured I will do later on in a different video, I want to give back first. I want to highlight other channels, other websites, other content creators who have made a difference and who are trying to help the Warcry community grow. And I'm going to read out a list of some of the best ones I've found. And there are plenty more out there, I am sure, but these are the ones that spring to mind when I think Warcry. So we have The Salty Sea, Off Meta Musings, Overthinking Warcry, Optimal Game State, Cinderfall Gaming, Dayton War Games Club, Mountainside Tabletop, Cinematic Tabletop, Battle Ready, Guerrilla Miniature Games, Tabletop Skirmish Games, Goonhammer, Age of Miniatures, and Hobby Jackal. Most of these channels are bigger than me, some of them are not quite as large, but all of these people deserve to have your viewership too. So if you haven't already subscribed or checked them out, please go and do so, because when we as a community help prop up other content creators, the community does nothing but win. And of course, there's also the freaking awesome Discord for Warcry that is filled to the brim with awesome people. There's a monthly Tabletop Simulator League, the first international Warcry league in the world that anyone of any skill level can join. There's a Reddit, oodles and oodles of things to interact with, and I highly, highly recommend that you do so. It's all awesome. Heck, from a community standpoint, the people who are watching this video right now are all freaking awesome too. absolute legends, one and all. But that's all I have time for today. I really wanted to gush about Warcry, take things a little bit slower, be a bit less scaredy, and just talk about a thing that I really enjoy and give back a little. Like I said before, one of my most popular videos, and the video that I am very likely most known for, is a video where I was quite negative on Warcry and Games Workshop. And whilst I do believe that having an air of negativity and criticizing people and companies and games and everything is worthwhile doing, it's a shame that such a negative video has gotten such a response. And I really wanted to try and address that and then take this video in a different direction and really talk about the positives of Warcry and highlight everything I could, from mechanics to formats and then even just the people in the game itself. So hopefully I've given back in a more positive way instead of focusing on all those negatives, even if the video in question is a little bit on the old side. Still though, I hope you all enjoyed this ramble. If you did, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and a subscribe. Let me know what your favorite aspect of Warcry is down below. And until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, I will see you in the next video. Ta-ra! Oh, and also the next video is going to be Spire Tyrants. Spire Tyrants! Woo!